Imagine you stumble upon an old jacket in the back of your closet. You reach into the pocket and find a crisp $100 bill from 1990. On paper, you are rich. Or at least, you feel like you found free money. But if you take that bill to the grocery store today, you are going to experience a very rude awakening. That single piece of paper hasn't changed. It is the same green dye, the same watermark, the same Benjamin Franklin staring back at you. But the invisible world around that bill has shifted beneath your feet. In 1990, that bill commanded a full shopping cart, meat, dairy, produce, maybe even a bottle of wine. Today, in 2026, that same bill barely covers the essentials in a plastic handbasket. This isn't just about things getting expensive, it is about your money quietly dying. Today, I am going to show you exactly how that happens, and why the math is scarier than you think. Most people treat inflation like the weather. It is just something that happens, and we complain about it, but we assume we cannot control it. We see the price of eggs go up, and we blame the grocery store or the supply chain. But that is looking at the problem backward. The price of eggs isn't really going up. The value of your dollar is going down. It is a subtle difference, but it changes everything about how you handle your money. If you don't understand the mechanics of this purchasing power shift, you are effectively working harder every single year just to stay in the exact same place. I have been looking at the long-term data on this, and the erosion of wealth isn't a bug in the system, it is a feature. And if you are not positioning yourself correctly, you are the one paying for it. We are going to break down something economists call Purchasing Power Parity, or PPP. Usually, that is a dry academic term used to compare countries. But I am going to use it to compare time periods, specifically 1990 versus 2026. By the end of this video, you will have a completely new way to visualize the money in your bank account. It is probably the best return on investment you will get for 30 minutes of your time this week. If you appreciate deep dives that respect your intelligence and your wallet, go ahead and subscribe. We don't just read headlines here, we take the engine apart to see how it works. Now, let's look at the first major myth about why your shopping cart is shrinking. There is a common belief that inflation is purely driven by companies deciding to charge more. You hear it all the time. People say prices are up because the CEO wants a new yacht. And sure, companies will always maximize profits. That is their job. But if that were the only cause, we would see prices fluctuate wildly in both directions. We don't. We see a persistent, relentless upward drift. The myth here is that the price tag is a measure of the product's value. We think the carton of milk is becoming more valuable. It's not. The milk is the same. The cow didn't get a raise. What is actually happening is that the measuring stick, the dollar itself, is shrinking. Imagine trying to build a house, but every day your tape measure loses a millimeter. Eventually, you need more inches to measure the same wall. That is the foundational concept we need to lock in before we look at the shopping cart. Let's look at the actual mechanism. Economists often define inflation as too much money chasing too few goods. It is a supply and demand equation, but for the currency itself. If the government prints trillions of new dollars and injects them into the economy, but we don't produce trillions of dollars worth of new stuff, the math has to balance out. The price of the stuff has to rise to absorb the new cash. I ran the numbers on the M2 money supply, that is basically all the cash and checking deposits in circulation. The chart looks like a hockey stick. When you flood the zone with currency, each individual unit becomes less rare and therefore less valuable. It is basic scarcity. So when you see a price hike, you are witnessing the dilution of your savings. It is not that the bread is special, it is that your dollar has been watered down. This is the math that eats your retirement fund silently. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Tom, so I lose 2 or 3% a year. I can live with that. It is annoying, but it is not a crisis. If that is your mindset, you are walking into a massive trap. We are going to get to the visual of the shopping cart in a second, and it is going to shock you. But first, you need to realize that inflation compounds just like interest. A 3% loss this year stacks on top of a 3% loss next year. Over a decade or two, that doesn't just skim off the top, it obliterates nearly half your purchasing power. Let's look at the psychology of why we let this happen. Economists have a term for this blind spot. They call it the money illusion. It is the human tendency to think of money in nominal terms rather than real terms. Nominal is the number printed on the bill. Real is what that bill can buy. We feel good when we get a 5% raise. We think we are moving up in the world. But if inflation is running at 6%, you just took a pay cut. Your brain, however, focuses on the bigger number on your paycheck. It is a psychological trick. We are wired to chase the higher number, even if the value behind it is hollow. This is why inflation is often called the hidden tax. No one sends you a bill for it. You don't write a check to the IRS. You just wake up one day and realize your standard of living has quietly slipped away while your bank account balance stayed the same. So, what is the fix? It starts with a protocol shift in how you view pricing. Stop asking, how much does this cost? And start asking, how much of my labor does this represent? Or, what percentage of my purchasing power does this consume? You have to mentally convert your dollars into units of goods. This is where purchasing power parity comes in. Instead of valuing your wealth in dollars, you need to value it in baskets of goods. If you have $10,000 saved, don't think of it as 10 grand. Think of it as 6 months of rent or 50 weeks of groceries. When you anchor your wealth to the physical world rather than the currency, you start making very different decisions about saving and investing. You stop hoarding paper and start looking for assets that maintain their basket-filling power. Let's make this tangible. I want you to visualize a shopping cart in 1990. You walk into the supermarket with that $100 bill. In 1990, the average price of a loaf of bread was about 70 cents. A gallon of milk was roughly $2.80. A pound of ground beef was maybe $1.50. You are throwing items into the cart with abandon. You have got the essentials: eggs, cheese, vegetables, cleaning supplies. But you also have room for the premium stuff: steaks, brand name cereal, maybe a case of soda. You fill that cart to the brim. You walk out to the parking lot with 4 or 5 heavy plastic bags. That $100 commanded a significant amount of labor and resources from the economy. It felt substantial. It felt like wealth. That is our baseline. That is what 100 units of currency used to represent in the physical world. Now, fast forward to 2026. You walk into the same store with the same $100 bill. But the price tags have changed. That loaf of bread is now pushing $4 or $5. The ground beef is $6 or $7 a pound. The milk is $4 or $5. You start putting items in the cart and you realize something terrifying. By the time you cover the absolute basics, the bread, the milk, the eggs, the meat, you have already burned through $60 or $70. You haven't even touched the cleaning supplies or the paper towels yet. The cart looks empty. It looks sad. You are not filling 5 bags anymore. You are filling 2. The mathematical reality is that the purchasing power has been cut by more than half. Cumulative inflation over that period is well over 100%. That means you need more than $200 today to replicate the experience you had for $100 back then. Here is the twist that makes it even harder to track. It is not just the price tag that changes. It is the product itself. Companies know that you have a psychological limit. You will freak out if a bag of chips crosses the $6 mark. So instead of raising the price to $7, they keep it at $5.99. But they shrink the bag from 16 ounces to 12 ounces. This is called shrinkflation. It is a stealth reduction in your purchasing power. The cart in 2026 doesn't just have fewer items. The items inside it are physically smaller. The toilet paper roll is narrower. The cereal box is thinner. So even if you manage to keep your grocery bill consistent, your caloric intake per dollar is dropping. The official inflation numbers often struggle to capture this quality adjustment perfectly. You are paying the same price for less product, which is just another way of saying your money is dying a death by 1,000 cuts. This leads us to a massive problem for anyone planning their future. Most financial advisors will tell you that you need $1 million to retire, or maybe $2 million. They give you a nice round number. But that number is a lie. If you are 30 years old today and you are aiming for $2 million by the time you are 60, you are aiming for a moving target. By the time you get there, that $2 million might only buy what $800,000 buys today. You will hit your number, pop the champagne, and then realize you can't afford the lifestyle you planned for. We need a way to normalize this data so we don't fool ourselves. That brings us to the economist's favorite tool, Purchasing Power Parity. Purchasing Power Parity, or PPP, sounds complicated, but it is actually just the shopping cart theory applied to geography. The classic example is the Big Mac Index. A Big Mac is a standard product. It is the same bun, same meat, same sauce, whether you are in New York or Mumbai. If a Big Mac costs $5 in the US and the equivalent of $2.50 in India, that tells you something about the currencies. It tells you that the dollar goes further in India. PPP is simply the exchange rate that would make the Big Mac cost the same everywhere. It is an attempt to equalize the shopping cart across borders. When economists compare the GDP of China versus the US, they often adjust for this because things are simply cheaper in China. A dollar buys more factory time, more labor, and more raw materials there. The theory relies on something called the law of one price. In an efficient market with no trade barriers, a gold bar should cost the same in London as it does in Tokyo, once you convert the currency. If it didn't, traders would just buy it where it is cheap and sell it where it is expensive until the price is leveled out. That is arbitrage. But we don't live in a frictionless world. We have shipping costs, tariffs, and local taxes. More importantly, we have services. You can't ship a haircut. You can't export a dentist appointment. That is why PPP diverges from market exchange rates. In wealthy countries, services are expensive because labour is expensive. In developing countries, labour is cheap, so the basket of goods costs less. This is why you feel rich when you go on vacation to certain countries. Your home currency has a higher PPP value there. You can fill a bigger cart. Here is the twist I want you to apply to your own life. Treat the past like a foreign country. The year 1990 is basically a foreign nation with a very favourable exchange rate. The currency was called the dollar, but it traded at a premium compared to the 2026 dollar. When we look at inflation, we are really just calculating the exchange rate between the past and the present. If the cumulative inflation is 150%, the exchange rate is roughly 2.5 to 1. You need 2.5 of today's dollars to buy 1 of 1990's dollars. When you start thinking like a currency trader moving through time, the panic subsides and the strategy begins. You stop expecting prices to go back down. You realise that the country of 2026 just has a structurally weaker currency than the country of 1990. You don't get mad at the exchange rate. You just adjust your trade. So how do you use this? You need to run your own PPP calculation for your income. If you are making $60,000 a year today, don't compare it to what your parents made. Compare it to the purchasing power of that era. I ran the numbers, and $60,000 today has the buying power of roughly $25,000 in 1990. If your dad made 30 grand in 1990, he was technically richer than you are at 60 grand today. That is a hard pill to swallow, but it is necessary medicine. The solution is to negotiate and plan based on real purchasing power. When you ask for a raise, you are not asking for more money. You are asking to maintain your cart size. If your income isn't rising faster than the PPP degradation, you are actively sliding backward. Now, the government tries to tell us that inflation is under control. They release the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, and say inflation is only 2 or 3%. But have you ever felt like their numbers don't match your receipts? That is because of a little trick called substitution bias. The government assumes that if steak gets too expensive, you will switch to chicken. If chicken gets expensive, you switch to beans. They count that as you managing your costs. I call it a lower standard of living. Let's look at how this distorts the official shopping cart. The CPI is supposed to represent a standard basket of goods. It tracks housing, food, energy, and medical care. But the composition of that basket changes over time. The folks measuring inflation update the basket to reflect what people are actually buying. This sounds logical, but it hides the pain. In 1990, the basket might have included prime rib. Today, if everyone stops buying prime rib because it is $50 a pound, the statisticians take it out of the basket and replace it with ground chuck. The index stays flat, but your dinner got worse. This is why the official inflation rate often feels lower than your personal inflation rate. They are measuring a flexible basket that adapts to poverty. You are trying to maintain a fixed standard of living. Those are two very different math problems. Then there is something called hedonic adjustment. This is the idea that if a product gets better, the price increase shouldn't fully count as inflation. For example, a car in 2026 costs way more than a car in 1990. But the 2026 car has airbags, backup cameras, and heated seats. The economists say, well, you are getting more car, so the price hike is justified. They adjust the price down in the data to account for the quality improvement, and mathematically, they are right. The technology is better. But financially, you still have to pay the higher sticker price. You can't go to the dealership and ask for the 1990 version without the backup camera for $10,000. That option doesn't exist. So while the quality-adjusted inflation might be low, the cash flow impact on your wallet is massive. You are forced to buy the premium version of everything, whether you want to or not. The twist here is that there is no such thing as the inflation rate. There are 330 million inflation rates in America, one for every person. If you commute 2 hours a day, your inflation rate is heavily tied to gas prices. If you are vegan, you don't care about the price of beef, but you care a lot about the price of vegetables. If you are renting, you are getting crushed by housing inflation. If you own your home with a fixed mortgage, you are shielded from that. The national CPI is just an average. It is a blurry photograph. You need to calculate your own basket. Look at your top 3 expenses. Monitor those. That is your personal purchasing power index. Ignore the news headlines. Look at your bank statement. That is the only data that matters. So, how do we fight back? The first step is to stop storing wealth in the thing that is shrinking. If you keep all your money in a checking account, you are guaranteeing a loss. You are betting on the $2026 maintaining its value, and that is a losing bet. You need to convert your currency into assets that tend to rise with the general price level. This is why the wealthy love real estate, stocks, and commodities. These are real things. A house is a house. A barrel of oil is a barrel of oil. If the dollar drops, the price of the house in dollars goes up to compensate. It is a natural hedge. Your goal should be to minimize the amount of time your wealth sits in cash. Cash is for liquidity. It is for paying bills next week. It is not a storage facility for your life's work. Let's bring it back to that shopping cart. In 1990, it was full. In 2026, it is half empty. That is not an accident. It is the result of monetary physics. We have walked through the mechanics of supply and demand, the psychology of the money illusion, and the geographical logic of purchasing power parity. We know that the official numbers often mask the reality through substitution and quality adjustments. But now you have the lens to see through it. When you see a price rise, don't get angry at the store clerk. Recognize it as a signal that your currency is depreciating and adjust your strategy accordingly. You can't stop the cart from shrinking, but you can put more dollars in your pocket to compensate, or better yet, own the companies that are selling the goods. I want you to try a little experiment this week. Go find an old receipt from a few years ago, if you have one, digital or physical. Compare those prices to what you pay today. Calculate your personal inflation rate. It is a sobering exercise, but it cuts through the noise. If you found this breakdown helpful, do me a favor. Share this video with someone who keeps complaining about prices but doesn't understand why they are rising. It helps the channel, and it might just save their retirement. I'm Tom, and this has been a look at why your money isn't what it used to be. Keep your eyes on the cart, not the cash. Talk soon.